Hello, my name is Tobias Lenz, Professor of International Relations at Leuphana University, Lüneburg. In this short video, I summarize the recent article, Comparative Regionalism Beyond Europe versus the Rest, co-authored with Fredrik Söderbaum from the University of Gothenburg. In the article, we ask about the current state of comparative regionalism as a field of research and take stock of recent developments. We understand comparative regionalism as an interdisciplinary field of study that examines the nature, drivers, dynamics, and consequences of processes of both state-led regionalism and private actor-led regionalization beyond the national state in a comparative perspective. We observe that comparative regionalism has suffered from a divide between those who take the EU and its respective predecessors as the model for conceptualizing, theorizing, comparing, and designing regionalism worldwide, and the critics who reject EU-centrism in favor of more contextualized comparisons that focus on the global South. We refer to this divide as that between the European Union versus the rest. Criticism of the research field comes from both sides. Whereas some criticize the continued EU-centrism of research, others detect a lack of conceptual, methodological, and theoretical rigor. What unites these critics and their diverse calls for change is the assumption that the research field is permeated by said divide between the EU versus the rest. In this paper, we challenge this characterization by showing how comparative regionalism has fundamentally changed in the last decade or so. We describe conceptual, theoretical, and methodological transformations in the research field to suggest that the EU is increasingly integrated into a genuinely comparative research agenda. These transformations show, we argue, that the chasm between the EU and regionalism and the rest of the world has ceased to be comparative regionalism's defining characteristic. In the first two sections of the paper, we provide brief historical reviews of how the divide reflects in respectively what we call the EU-centric and the EU-critical scholarship. And even though research has changed over time, these two camps are clearly identifiable throughout most of comparative regionalism's history. The core part of the paper then outlines three contemporary transformations. The first transformation is conceptual. We show that scholars increasingly disaggregate regionalism into specific components, such as individual policy fields, specific norms, governance mechanisms, or institutions. Here we highlight research on environmental regionalism, for example, citizenship norms, and regional parliaments, among others. Such disaggregation, we argue, avoids analyzing regionalism in its entirety, which was characteristic of research for a long time prior, and thus renders systematic comparison more tractable and less individual case-centric. And it avoids conceptions of regionalism that are taken directly from the EU. The second transformation is theoretical. We demonstrate that scholars develop frameworks that build on general social science theories and actively seek to move beyond EU-centrism. Here we highlight, for example, recent governance approaches, work on authoritarian regionalism that builds off of cases from the global South, and research that self-reflectively questions and tries to overcome EU-centrism, such as the decentering agenda. The third transformation is methodological, and we propose that scholars increasingly use more rigorous comparative designs and a broader range of data. Maybe the most notable trend here is what we call a data revolution. That is the emergence of large N data sets of regional organizations on core analytical dimensions, such as institutional design, policy output, and self-legitimation discourses. But we also note that much qualitative research has become more self-reflective in terms of case selection, operationalization, and measurement of core concepts, and actual comparison. Taken together, our article provides a new understanding of how to conceive of the research field of comparative regionalism as it has evolved over time. The contemporary transformations that we outline mark the end of, we argue, overt forms of EU-centrism in concepts, theory, and methodology, and thus the end of the chasm between the EU versus the rest. Yet, they have not led to a more equal distribution of knowledge production across different parts of the world. We detect continued Western centrism and suggest that the premium that these developments put on professional training in theory and method may even raise barriers to entry into the research field. It may also undermine pluralism. So we close the article by making some suggestions on how the transformation could be more fully exploited. Thank you.